Hello everybody, Daniel Rothmel here again in my DevOps lair. Thanks for joining me for this screencast of another project for my Level Up in Tech DevOps Bootcamp. Most recently, this past week, we learned all about Kubernetes. So before that, we learned about Docker, and in the past week, we learned about Kubernetes, because Kubernetes is a container orchestration service to help you manage your Docker containers and do cool stuff with your Docker containers. So the project for this week combines that learning. So what we were tasked with this week was creating a Dockerfile and then deploying that Dockerfile inside a Kubernetes pod and then accessing it, a basic hello document page. So that's what we were tasked with doing. So, we had to draw upon all of our knowledge of Docker and Docker files, and then what we learned about Kubernetes. Now, I will say Kubernetes was wicked frustrating. This project took me a lot longer than I thought, because some of the ways I tried to do it in the beginning weren't exactly right, and then I was trying to force to do it that way, and then when I realized those weren't the right ways, the other ways I was doing, I had some errors. So, it took me way longer than I expected, and Kubernetes had me wanting to pull out hair I don't even have. But I was able to figure it out, especially with the help of my fellow teammate James. Shout out to James for helping me, sending me some links. And then Uncle Google was always super helpful, even though in the beginning he wasn't. Kubernetes documentation, a couple things I found, but I was able to work it all out to make it happen. So now that's what I'm going to walk you through. I'm going to walk you through how you can create a Dockerfile with a simple hello page that you can deploy into a Kubernetes cluster, into a pod on a Kubernetes cluster, and then access it that way. All right. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to get my head out of the way, get my face out of the way. All right. And obviously, since we are using a Dockerfile, we have to create a Dockerfile. So the question is, what are we going to use in order to display the page? Well, the simplest answer is a web server, a simple web server. So we're going to use NGINX. So you can see the Dockerfile is pretty simple. We just have from NGINX, and then I copied a custom index.html that I made here, and we copy that into the default location for NGINX, so that's what it'll look at. That's what we'll get when we display the page. And then, now that we have the Dockerfile, but again, always remember with your Dockerfiles, capital D Dockerfile. It's got to be capital D. And then I got the commands here. So we're going to copy this command to build our image. So remember, when you're building an image in Docker, when you're using a Dockerfile, you want that image to be in the working directory that you run the command from, because that's what this little period means, right? The period means, hey, Docker, look in the directory that I'm in to find the Dockerfile. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to call this drothml, which is my username for Docker, and then hello, which is the name of the, what I want to call my file, and then I'm tagging it version 1.0. This is important, the tag, and you'll see why this is important in just a second. But this tag is important. So if you want to do this, your file name should be whatever your username for Docker is, and then whatever you want to call. You can use hello 1.0. You can call it hello world 1.0, but use the tag. You don't want to leave it untagged, because Kubernetes best practices is not to leave it untagged, not to rely on the default latest tag, because you'll get image pull errors, which I discovered. So save yourself a lot of trouble. Tag it correctly. Okay, so now you can see the image has been built. So the next thing is, if we're going to, how can we access this image? Where do we put this image in order to access it for a Kubernetes cluster? Well, the simple answer is on Docker Hub in a repository attached to my account, a public repository. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So you can see, if we go to my account here, I have one test repository in here, but this is my Docker account. And then you can see I don't have any other repositories. So that means we need to create the image in a repository. We need to push the image into a repository. So we will take the command to do that right here. And this is why the naming and everything was important, because in order to push it into the repository, we need to do Docker push, again, whatever your username is for Docker, and then whatever the image is, and the tag. Again, you don't, if you've already if you've tagged it when you've named it, then this saves you a step. Otherwise, if you haven't tagged it when you named it, then you got to tag it. But we did this correctly. So again, yours is going to be Docker push whatever your username is, and then whatever you named and tagged the image. So we'll do that, and it will go ahead and it will do all the things it needs to do in order to push the image, and there we go. Okay, so now if we go back to our repositories on the Docker Hub, my repositories, oh, we got to wait a little bit. There we go. We can see that there's the image in there. So it's in the repository. So we can see there's the tag, the 1.0 tag. So that's what we need, right? It's in the Docker repository. Okay, so now the next step here is how are we going to deploy this? What are we going to do in order to deploy it? So the thing we want to do is you should have Kubernetes already installed locally. If you don't, go to kubernetes.io and follow the install instructions for setting up Kubernetes on your machine. Once you do that, you also need to set up Minikube because Minikube allows us to run tests on Kubernetes clusters locally on our local machine, so we don't have to like go to a playground or spin up servers on a cloud platform or something like that. Now there's a little bit of customization, there's a little bit of configuring we have to do, for Minikube when we launch it, but here is the command to start Minikube. It's very simple. It's just Minikube start. So we'll go back and we'll put that in. Let Minikube get rolling. It takes a little bit. Figuring out, and also there are some quirks if you're like me, if you're on a MacBook or any Mac running Mac OS and you have the M1 chip. There are some quirks to Minikube, but I mean everything you can work around everything. And in the way that I figured out how to do this project, all those workarounds are sort of automatic. But if you run into problems with some of your networking and stuff on Kubernetes and you're on Apple with an M1 chip, that could be part of the reason. That was one of the things that I discovered in doing all of my research. All right, so we're almost done here. All right, so now Minikube is ready. So you can see the Minikube, we have a Minikube cluster and the default namespace. Now we have to do a little bit of configuring, like I said, because we want Minikube to use the Docker environment that's on our local machine. So that's what this command does. It runs the Docker environment that we have on our local machine. And then next, now that we have the image, we need to create our deployment, obviously, from the image that we created and pushed to our repo. So this command is the standard kubectl create deployment. So you can see kubectl create deployment. The name of the deployment is going to be hello. And this is the important part. The image is docker.io/my username/ what we have in there. So on yours, it would be image equals docker.io/your username/ however you named it. If you named it the same thing, then that's great. All right, so that's simple. That's created. Next, we need a way to access the deployment, right? To access the pod. So what we want to do is we want to expose the port on the pod so that we can get to it. And with NGINX, the default is 80, is port 80. So we will go back and we'll put this command in. So now what we're doing here is we're saying kubectl expose the deployment hello. The type of exposure, the type of service we're creating is a node port. We're exposing port 80, and we're going to name this service that's going to be created hello. So you'll see when we do that, it will say service/hello exposed. Now, we can double check just to make sure things are working. Like if we do kubectl get pods, we'll see that there's the pod, and we'll see that it's running. So we know our pod is running. We know the service is there. Now, how do we make sure that it's working? We go back and we do Minikube service hello, which accesses the service and runs it for us so that we can validate that we've done everything correctly and then our page works. So we do Minikube service hello, and what this should do is open up the browser and open up the page and show you the custom HTML. So let's see. Da-da! Hello? Is it me you're looking for? I just couldn't resist the HTML. It seemed too obvious. It was too good. I had to do it that way. So there we go. We have created a Dockerfile with an NGINX image and some custom HTML. We then took that Dockerfile and we pushed it up to Docker Hub in a public repo on our Docker Hub account. And then we used Minikube from Kubernetes to utilize that Dockerfile to put it on a Kubernetes node in a pod. And then we created a service to give access to the index.html page. We tested it and it worked. So there we go. You've done it. So thanks for following along. I hope you enjoyed it. It took me a long time to figure this out. So I hope you find this valuable, as simple as it is. And as always, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on GitHub. You can connect with me on drothaml.com. I will see you around the interwebs. And until next time, everybody take it easy.